everyone. This is the History Hound, and I'm with you tonight to talk about all the steps that you need to go through in order to set up a successful oral history interview. I was over on Zoom. I had scheduled on Zoom, but nobody showed up, so I thought I'd hop over here to Facebook to see if anybody wanted to talk about setting up oral history interviews. I talk a little bit about all the steps that you need to go through in order to make the interview a success. Maybe give you benefit of a little bit of my experience on setting up interviews and conducting interviews, and to be truthful, to encourage you to do that, to go out and interview your friends and your family, even yourself, and capture your memories for posterity. Sadly, since I started doing this and put together an initial list of about 100 people, a number of those people, in fact, probably about a third of them have passed, and their stories have been lost to forever. So everything that I do, whether it be the walking tours or the presentations or whatever I do, when people make contributions, that money goes to finance the oral history project that we do. What I do is not only do I teach people how to do it for themselves, but I also will go out, get my equipment, and go out and meet them wherever they feel comfortable in being interviewed. I jump at the chance to interview the people because we need to capture these people's stories, because they're the only ones that know their story. Sadly, we live in a generation where people don't talk to their family anymore. They don't answer questions. They don't talk about their past. They don't share their memories very often, and they're being lost, which is quite sad. I can tell you that I've been doing it. I first started back in the 70s, just as an assistant to people who were doing it. Primarily my Uncle George Loosby, who was conducting audio oral history interviews, and I've maintained it over the years, and so I've got quite a collection of interviews with absolutely fascinating people. For those people who read my articles on Newmarket Today every weekend, you'll notice that I often in my sourcing, I indicate that the information came from an oral history interview that I had conducted over the years. You can see the results of sort of a sampling of my oral history interviews I've done over the years. If you go to my YouTube channel, just the History Hound on YouTube, you'll be able to see oral history interviews that I've done, everything from one-on-ones to groups, special interest, people who wanted to be interviewed about a certain topic, and so we did that, all for free. I pick up the tab of all the equipment, and that's my contribution to the process, because I feel so strongly in us doing it. And so I wanted to do this sort of presentation to go through the steps on how to do how to conduct the interviews, and some of the stresses that are involved, and how to be successful in getting people to allow you to interview them. I wrote an article, last weekend's article on Newmarket Today was on the first part of encouraging people to do oral history interviews, and I want to delve a little more into it tonight. I'm taping this, and so I'll be able to play it back to those people who are unable to watch us live. So first thing I want to talk about is, or one of the first difficulties that you always have, is trying to convince people to sit with you for an oral history. And now, because of the situation we have with the virus, it's almost impossible to sit face to face with people at this particular time. But with Skype, with Zoom, with all of the different software that's out there, you can do oral history interviews via the internet, and it can be not quite as satisfactory because it's great to be able to look into people's eyes and make a personal connection, but it's the next best thing, of course. And we need to do this because we don't really know how long we're going to be in isolation. So trying to get people to allow you to interview them. You have to be, in the beginning, a bit of a salesperson. So what you need to do is you need to overcome some of the objections. First objection, I think, I always used to hear was people would say, well, I have nothing to say. There's nothing about me that's interesting. There's nothing that I can add to the narrative of history. And of course that's not true. And I think deep down they know it's not true. But most people are very modest. I can tell you from experience, some of the best interviews that I've done have been with people who initially thought that they had absolutely nothing to contribute, and 10 or 15 minutes into the interview, my mouth is open because I'm just so absolutely fascinated with what they have to say, with the life that they live. Very unique. They have a perspective that only they could have, and it's well worth having. I always relate this sort of a funny little story. In Toronto, for a number of years, I used to do a program called Oral History for Children. And what we used to do is we used to take children and we would hook them up with their grandparents, and we would have them interview their grandparents. I would provide them with a list of questions, sample questions, and they would go through and they would pick out the questions that they most wanted to ask Grandma and Grandpa. And I remember sitting down with this lady, and she said, well, I think this is going to be kind of boring for my grandchildren because there's really nothing interesting about either me or their grandfather. So, we set everything up, we turned the cameras on, and very shortly into the interview, the little boy asked the grandmother, so how did you meet Grandpa? Which was one of the questions that we had provided. And to my surprise, she said, well, your grandfather used to come and watch me. I was dancing at that time, and he used to come every lunch and watch me dance. And, of course, my ears picked up because I thought, oh boy, she was a professional dancer. This is going to be really interesting. So the little boy got really into it, and he said, oh, so, were you in ballet, or what did you do? And she said, no, I was a burlesque dancer. Which, again, when you look at an 80-year-old woman and you try and picture her as a burlesque dancer, it was absolutely amazing. And as time went on, she got more into what it was like to be young. She was a maid, I guess, in a big house in Toronto, and she discovered that, I guess somebody approached her and said, you could dance on stage and make, a lot of money. I encouraged the little boy to ask her how much she made. I was really interested in how much she made, and she was saying that she made about 95 cents an hour as a maid, and she would make up to $10 an hour dancing, which again doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it's 10 times more than she would have made if she was a maid. So as time went on, she talked about more and more about her life and the interesting people that she met, and she went through the who's who of the Toronto entertainment scene during the time she was dancing, having worked with Milton Berle and Bob Hope and all kinds of other famous people. So I was absolutely intrigued. Now there's an example of a lady who said, I have absolutely nothing exciting about my life, and yet one of the best interviews I've ever been part of. It was just absolutely intriguing. And this is, if you go onto YouTube and you take a look at some of the highlight ones that I've put on YouTube, I think you'll find that these people are absolutely fascinating in their stories and what they remember about growing up, not only in Newmarket, but just growing up in Canada in the early and middle part of the 1900s. So, what is the first step that you should be doing? Well, first of all, the key is connection. I mean, there's a lot of other things. We're going to talk a little bit about preparation and all these things, but the key thing is to make a connection with the person, because obviously the person has to feel comfortable in talking to you. They have to feel comfortable in letting you into their life. And so, therefore, in your preparation, you need to do everything you can to prepare properly, so that when you sit down with, or you start interviewing the person over, say, Skype or Zoom or whatever you choose, that you're going to establish a connection with them. Best way to do that, of course, is to know a little bit about them. People always ask me, well, how much time do I allot to the person? I've learned from experience that I don't really allot any time. Sometimes it might take as much as an hour and a half with the first 10 or 15 minutes, just having a general discussion. The important thing for me is to get a feel for what's important to them, what are the things that they want to talk about. I always ask what they don't want to talk about. I mean, I think this is important because often there are topics that people don't want to talk about, either because it is going to elicit some sort of emotion, or perhaps they might still be angry about something, and they'd be very embarrassed if they start talking about the topic. So I always ascertain if there's anything that's not on the table. I also generally will give them a copy of the questions that I'm going to ask. Not all of them, but a general overdraft beforehand, so that they can take a look at it, so that they can sort of think about it. There's nothing worse than somebody to sit down cold and say, "Tell me about yourself." So it's best to give them a little bit of preparation. You don't want to give them a lot of preparation, because that tends to elicit sort of a canned answer. I learned very early that a lot of people used to write down their answers, and it didn't come across as being spontaneous. Also, too, the key is when you want to get people to talk about themselves, is talk about something that, as I say, that they enjoy. So, if you get talking about their childhood, their school days, how they met their spouse, what jobs did they do when they were younger, what important people or intriguing people did they meet, what characters of, in this case, Newmarket, did they get to know as a kid, that that changed their life, this sort of thing. And I can tell you that once people start talking, quite often, we'll just leave the cameras rolling long after my intended time to end the conversation. Also, too, you can always remember that you can tape, even if you're really only going to use, maybe 30 or 40 minutes of the interview. You could tape for an hour and a half. That gives you the opportunity to cut and paste. That gives you an opportunity to take out things that you don't want, and highlight the really interesting things that were intriguing for you. Also, too, and I talked about the lady and the burlesque. The other thing that sometimes happens, and I sort of alluded to it, is that people will get talked to and they kind of forget where they are, and so they will start talking to you about things that, in hindsight, they probably don't want to be talking about. So I just let them go on, because we can always edit it out. It's probably a good time to mention that this is one of the deals that I make with people. I always make a deal that they get to view the footage before we do anything with it. So I send the raw footage to the people, and they get the opportunity to listen to themselves. And quite often, as I say, they will find that there's maybe one or two things that they mentioned in the interview that they may not want to make public, or they don't want to broadcast, and so we take those out, and that's fine. That's one of the reasons why it's really a good idea to tape much longer than you need, so that you have that leeway to take things out. Give you an example, I sat down with a lady, again, I'd say she's probably mid-80s. Very innocent question. I asked her whether she enjoyed living on the street that she grew up on, and it turns out that she had a neighbor that she didn't like, and she proceeded to spend about 10 minutes telling me about well, basically this guy was a waste of a human life. And of course I knew that we were going to be taking this out, but you don't want to, one of the things that you learn is you don't want to stop the flow. Once people start talking, you don't want to really interrupt them, because you get such great stuff that people tell you. So I didn't want to interrupt this lady, but you know, when she was finished, she said, "Oh my gosh, you know, I talked about that and I shouldn't have." And I said, "Don't worry, we're going to take that out," which we did. So there's nothing to worry about. So that's one of the things that's important, is that I think is important, is that you allow people to take a look at the raw footage and decide what they want in and what they want out. Obviously, you're the ultimate decision maker, but what is the point of putting things in an interview that people don't want to be part of the interview? And you know, if you do that to one person, they're going to spread the word that it wasn't a good experience. And most of the people who have been gracious enough to allow me to interview them came because somebody else told them what a great experience it was to be interviewed. When I first started, I did both the camera and the interviews. Now, if you take a look at the later videos, I'm quite often doing the camera work, and I've done the setting up of the interview. I've supplied the person who's doing the interview with the questions, sort of direct them from off camera. So I'm not as much on camera as I am in the background and filming, and of course I do the editing, so that's also part of what I want to do. It's also important that the person feel comfortable with the person they're talking to. So if you take a look at the videos that are on the YouTube channel, the variety, you'll see that I've used quite a few different hosts to do the interviews. I've had particularly good luck with Mr. Jack West. Mr. Jack West, particularly for the people who grew up in the Newmarket area, everybody knows Mr. West, everybody trusts him, and he has a demeanor about him that brings out all the good stories and puts people at ease. So that's also a very important part of it. So if you don't personally have the talent to put people at ease, then I would suggest that you may want to you know, get their daughter or their son or somebody else, even probably their husband or wife, to do the interview, because it's very important that there's a rapport between the person who's doing the interview and the person who's being interviewed. The other thing I think that's is important, and a lot of people forget about it, is to thank people at the end. One of the difficulties when I first started is that the first people that I started to work with, quite often they would forget to pick up that phone or send a card and thank the people for their time. What I always do, and what I've always done since I started doing this on my own, was to not only thank them for allowing me to interview them, but sending them a copy, a finished copy of the interview that they could disperse to their loved ones and their friends, so that they too could see the interview, because you know, on a more personal note. So I think that's important as well. I think you need to be courteous in doing that. The other thing I think that's important aspect of doing oral history is to interview people that maybe you wouldn't ordinarily come into ordinary contact with. So that might be somebody who's a great deal older than you are, or maybe somebody who grew up in a different community, shall we say, even a different aspect of the Newmarket community, because it gives you a perspective on Newmarket from, as I say, from their particular perspective, which might be very different from yours. And I think it also affords others an opportunity to see the town and our history through a different pair of eyes. Now, what I will do for anybody who sends me a message and requests it, I will send you out. I have a little prepackaged set of guidelines as to how to conduct an interview, along with what I like to call my 100 most popular questions, guaranteed to get people talking. In my article, I mentioned, and I think it's particularly the case, that you've got to be careful that you ask questions that don't elicit a yes or no answer. You want people to talk to you and explain from their own perspective, things that they've seen, things that they've heard, people that they've met. You also, what you want to do is you want to elicit some emotion from them as well. So you want to take them to a place that perhaps they haven't been for a while, a place that they really enjoy revisiting. And with their revisiting it, it allows you to I think, to get a much better interview. Also, too, a lot of people, when I first started, said, well, you shouldn't allow, a husband and wife to be interviewed together, or you shouldn't allow maybe a senior and a daughter or son to be interviewed with them. And I found that not to be the case. Most people need to feel comfortable, and if being interviewed with, a spouse or with a son or daughter makes them more comfortable, I think that's important. Also, too, it's a good idea too to have somebody with them, particularly somebody who's a little bit older, because somebody who's with them might be able to trigger their memory or remember something. Quite often when you're interviewing people, they will, unnecessarily will get stuck on a fact or get stuck on a name. And if they're with somebody that they know, that they trust, and that person can say, oh, you're thinking about Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, or you're thinking about this particular event, that will get them over that hurdle and get them back on topic. Because the worst thing that can happen to you is when a person just stops dead. Because it's very difficult to get them going again. You want to continue that momentum. So I would suggest that also too, I just thought the other thing too is that there's nothing wrong with interviewing more than one person at the same time. You'll see an example on the YouTube channel of an interview I did with a couple where first we did him, and then we did her, and then we did the two of them together. And I think it made for a fascinating interview. We did a couple of those actually, where we did couples. So it doesn't necessarily need to be just one person. So again, the key, I think, is probably to get people to allow you to interview them. And the key to that is, first of all, they have to trust you. Second of all, they have to be able to develop a rapport with you, and you have to overcome that initial stage fright. I don't know about other generations, but my generation, my mother, my grandmother always used to tell me that it was impolite to talk about yourself. And it's amazing how many people still to this day live that adage. They think that it's wrong to sit and talk about yourself and to be the center of conversation. But the sad thing is that as people go, as people leave us, we're left with huge voids because we have nobody to tell their story. As I say, one of the reasons why I got involved with the program of matching up grandparents and grandchildren and doing oral history interviews is because I realized that there was a real generation gap. Nobody ever seems to ask Grandma and Grandpa about their life, and so they know nothing about their grandmother and grandfather and their realities, and they don't. What's really cool is when we were doing that, quite often afterwards the grandchild would say, I now see where I got this trait. I can see that Grandma is very much like me, or Grandpa is very much like me. I always thought that I was very different than everybody else, like Mom and Dad, and maybe brothers and sisters. But they could see in their grandmother, grandfather traits that they had, so they could certainly understand why they are the way they are, which I think is very important. Well, one of the sad things about today's life is that I don't think most of us really know who we are, why we believe what we do, and I always remember my mother saying to me that it was important to understand who you are and where you come from. And I think part of that is this oral history process. So, this is the part where I plead for you to engage in oral history interviews with people that you know, and to convince others to do likewise, to interview people. My dream is to be able to put together an archive that I can leave behind of thousands of interviews of people from the Newmarket area, so that in the coming generations people can go into, say, the library, put on a pair of headphones, and listen to somebody tell them about what it was like to live through the war years, or the Depression years, or live through the virus that we have now. This is important to capture because these people lived through it, and they can tell what it was like, not only from a bare bones, but what it was like, how they felt about it, and their observations about the time and the event. So I think that's very, very important. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. And again, if you are interested in these cheat sheets, if you send me an email, it's a nice simple email to remember. It's thehistoryhound@rogers.com. If you send me an email, I'd be happy to send you a copy of the cheat sheets so that you can get started doing this yourself. Likewise, if there's anything I can help you with, if you need help in putting together your interviews, if you decide that you've got people that you want to be interviewed but you don't want to do it, or you don't want to record it, or you don't have the equipment, if you get a hold of me, I will make arrangements to do the interview, whether it be online, or whether at that point we're able to go to their home or their establishment and do it in person. As I say, it's free. It's part of what I do as a volunteer, because I feel so strongly that this is a necessity to do. So let's just take a look. I haven't really been looking at the messages to see if there's anybody out there. Well, we've got a few people who have joined us. That's very nice. Anybody have any questions about oral history? Again, I hope that I've been able to convince people to take up this task. It's one of the reasons why I departed from my usual type of article that I do on Newmarket Today, and do that article last week to try and encourage people, or to introduce the idea of doing oral history interviews with people that they know. If you think about it, it would multiply, tremendously if we could get 100 people who would do oral history interviews. That would probably mean that we'd get 400 or 500 interviews taped, and they'd be, so important, not only for the public but also for the people's families as well, to be able to play back, to be able to show the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, to be able to show. My first interviews I did with my grandmother and my grandfather, and as you can see, I'm virtually brought to tears when I take a look at those, because it takes me back to being, a 9 or 10-year-old child sitting in front of my grandmother and my grandfather, and them telling me about their lives, what was important to them, and what lessons they wanted to pass along to me for my life. So I can tell you from personal experience, it's so important to to capture these moments. And if we capture these moments, and if we're able to put them in an archive, this is terrific. Oh, we've got a question. Can pictures be taken? Well, actually, it's interesting. When I've done interviews, I've had some people who say, you can do a audio interview, but I don't want to be on camera. And it's not my business to try and convince them that they look fine on camera. So I'll do an audio interview, and I'd say probably I've got about maybe about 60, maybe over 60 audio interviews with people. So you have to be very respectful of people and whether they want their picture taken. Same thing, they tell you if you're a tourist. And I travel a lot, and one of the first things that I was told was always ask people their permission before you take their picture, because there's a lot of people who don't want their picture taken. What's the best recording medium these days? Well, it's funny because it depends on where I am, but I have 3 cameras, regular video cameras. I do a lot of recording using my iPhone or my iPad. Lately I've been doing a lot of recordings over Zoom or over Skype and doing it that way. I don't really think the medium matters. What is important, and the reason why in a lot of cases I use my iPhone, is that a lot of people are mesmerized by cameras. If you put a large camera on a tripod in the corner of the room, people are, for whatever reason, are drawn to that camera, or they feel ill at ease. But it's funny how many people are not really that concerned about a phone in somebody's hand. And so I've used, and you'll see a number of the interviews that are on the YouTube channel were done with an iPhone. In fact, the taping of the Doan 200th anniversary that I did at Sharon Temple was done on an iPhone, and I think it's pretty good. Obviously, you need to be a little bit closer, but I think it works very well. Good point, Diane. It's not only the stories, but it's the voice. As I mentioned before I started to choke up, when I go back every once in a while and listen to the tapes that I did of my mother, my grandmother and grandfather, just the second they start talking, that voice takes me back, and I remember sitting there and listening to the conversation. So the voice is very important too, and I don't want to be sort of somebody who's preaching doom, but people pass very, very quickly. And if I had $1 for everybody who said, man, I wish I had sat down and talked to my mom and dad, or I wish I had sat down and talked to my grandmother and grandfather, I'd be a millionaire, because people always regret that they didn't do that. So my suggestion is don't regret it. It's so simple to do. And if you need help, as I say, contact me. I'd be happy to help you out, and we can do it together, and you can get a keepsake. And as I say, it's free. I keep saying it's free because people, for some reason, seem to think that this is my business. This is my hobby. Not a business. It's my hobby, and I believe so strongly in this that I donate my time. Remember your grandmother reciting? Oh, all right. You're lucky. Learn at the. A lot of people have got keepsakes like this. And the other thing I should mention is that it's so simple now to take a cassette and digitize it so that it's in a modern format. Again, as I say, over the years I've put together my own little studio obviously for my own use. But I now can convert the old Betamax tapes and the VHS. I can convert cassettes. I can even do Super 8. A few of the videos that you'll see on the YouTube channel were originally done in Super 8 way back in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. And I've been able to bring them back and put them into digital form. So you can always do that too. In fact, one of the interviews we did, lady brought along a old tape that she had of the Centennial, Newmarket Centennial Parade, and she'd be maybe about maybe 10 or 11 in the video, and we were able to incorporate that with the interview that we did with her. And it's just amazing to go from a color picture to a black and white, and see a lady in her 60s and early 70s as a 8 or 9-year-old child. It's just absolutely amazing. So we can do some really creative things with And there's nothing wrong with doing audio tapings. I mean, everybody seems to think that nowadays that you've got to, get out your video camera and videotape everybody, but you don't. I mean, there's nothing as powerful as the human voice. So if this is the medium that your subject feels most comfortable in, then by all means do that. Because the other thing too that you can do is you can take their voice and you can take old pictures that you have of them, or even superimpose the voice over stock footage of the time period that they lived, and you can make a tremendous presentation piece that you can give them and that you can keep for a keepsake for your family. Any other questions here? Looks like it. So, again, my three things that I want to end with. First of all, I implore you to not only to tape yourself and to tape others in your immediate community, but also to encourage other people to do so as well. Let's build an archive of information. If you're interested in getting my tips and my 100 surprising questions that will get people talking, for sure, let me know that you're interested, and I'll send it along to you. And the third thing is, if you need help, whether it's just be advice or talk you through how to do it, or if you need help in the form of me actually taping it for you or helping you to tape it online and setting everything up, just let me know and we'll get it done. So that shouldn't be a deterrent for you. The hard part, of course, and I acknowledged as we began, is to make that connection, to convince that person that they are worth interviewing, that what they have to say and what they experienced is worth keeping. So I think that's important. Anyway, yeah, we all know people. This is Kathleen has made a good point. We all know people who we know we should tape. But unfortunately, if you're anything like me, I have good intentions, or I used to have good intentions, and I would wait too long. And there's no feeling that's worse than to realize that you waited too long to connect with that person and to save what they have to say. So don't do that. I don't do that anymore. I get out there and I talk to anybody that I can, and I do things like this, whether it be the article or whether it be coming here on Facebook Live and talking about it. I have made it my point to try and encourage other people to do this, because I know what it feels like to not only to have missed capturing people, but I also know what it's like to have those tapes of your loved ones and to be able to listen to their stories again and again and again. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me. I hope that I've encouraged you. And as I say, if you need anything from me, just let me know. You can get a hold of me my email, thehistoryhound at rogers.com, or you could message me from my Facebook group page. Of course, that's the History Hound, where I'm broadcasting from today. Or you can leave a message on YouTube. I'm hoping that many of you will go on to the YouTube channel and take a look at the variety of old videos on there. It's not only the oral history, but their old parades and things that have happened in Newmarket that we've been able to digitize and put online so that people can experience again. Anyway, I see now we're starting to get some other people joining us. That's good. Yeah, they say it's easier to do friends than family. I've always found convincing my family to do it was always a little bit more difficult, but they're also the most valuable people, I think, to get to, their input. Also, too, as was mentioned earlier in a comment, we all know people on our street or in our social groups that have fascinating stories, capture them. You know, convince them to sit down and let you capture them, because when they go, they're gone. I can't emphasize that enough. It's their story. They're the only ones that lived it. They're the only ones that know it. And if we miss it, then it's gone forever. Anyway, I thank you very much for allowing me to address you on this. I'm going to tape this, so if you know somebody who'd be interested in this, I will put it online so that people can see it. So I thank you very much. Please stay safe, and till next time we get together, right now I'm working on a virtual walking tour of Main Street, where we're going to stop at all of the buildings on Main Street, and we'll talk about not only what they are now, but what they did going back in time, back into the 1800s, for those buildings that are still there. So that should be good. It will be long, I warn you. It'll be a long one. The one I did at the historical properties in Newmarket was over 2 hours. But keep in mind, because it's on YouTube, or you can download it, you know, you can watch it at your leisure. And if you are out doing a drive-by of these places, or you're doing a walk, when we could get out and walk, you know, you can play it on your phone or on your audio equipment, and you can get a nice walking tour of the area. And that's basically what I'm doing now, along with writing the articles every weekend. Anyway, take care. Stay safe.